Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about my experience with Jackson's Watercolor. If you're not familiar with Jackson's, they are a huge art supply store based in the UK with a great online shopping site that ships worldwide. Their store brand watercolors are made for them by Sennelier, an OEM style service that just means Sennelier's factory in France manages the production of these paints. It does not mean that there are no differences between the two brands, even though they both share many overlapping colors. I did notice that some of the color names that overlap between them are listed as using different pigment ingredients. This is likely due to a typo error though, and I'll elaborate more on that in a minute. Before I get too far into my observations regarding Jackson's watercolor, I will say that they are acceptable for use as a professional grade watercolor. My goal here is not to suggest that you buy or not buy them, but rather to make sure you are informed before deciding. They are definitely not the worst option out there. They do have some limitations though, and do not meet my personal artistic needs. Someone interested in subtle layering, such as for realistic botanical art florals, and artists not concerned about accurate pigment information may appreciate these paints more than I did. I'm showing colors from my first purchase at the start of this video, but I'll be adding a few more pans and tubes for evaluation later in the video. Last year, I set up a little primary mixing palette from full-size pans and light fast tested them so I could be confident in any work I sell using them. They also offer half pans and tubes that come in 10 or 21 ml size, using the same tube packaging as Sennelier with different sticker overlays. If you're determined to try these paints, I would start with a small mixing set like this just to see if you like the paint properties before investing in more colors. Because both Jackson's and Sennelier make unusually salt-reactive, smooth particle ultramarine blues, that is not my preferred representation of its typical texture and color separating properties. I felt that phthalo blue was the superior versatile option for color mixing. I chose cadmium yellow because it's a very strong economical pigment with reliable light fastness, but the opacity can look a little cloudy in layers, so PY154 or PY3 might be a good alternative if you want to avoid opaque colors. I would skip past other primary yellows Jackson's offers, like Aureolin PY40 and Indian Yellow with PY83, as those pigments can discolor or fade over time. Quin Purple PR122 is an ideal primary cool red option, but if you notice that it's marked as only fair light fastness online, it's because Sennelier provides an outdated ASTM LF3 rating, but they also self-rate PR122 at 3 of 3 stars, which is more accurate. Unfortunately, this Jackson's color is notably less pigmented and requires a bit of extra scrubbing with a wet brush to reach the same saturation as its Sennelier counterpart. I've read that their pan and tube formulas are different, and here it seems like the pan had a lot more binder than their other colors. I used up more of this color than expected, putting a pretty big dent in the pan just from swatching, which usually only happens when working with a student grade pigment load. My Sennelier version of PR122, called Helios Purple, was much easier to re-wet, but the tube version does dry pretty sticky in self-port pans. That's not ideal for travel, but it released more saturated color and also flowed or dispersed across wet washes more easily. For rounding out a limited palette, I also added Quin Gold and Payne's Gray, which allows me to more easily achieve floral greens and dark shadow colors. Jackson's Quin Gold was labeled with incorrect pigment information, carelessly copy-pasted from Sennelier's uncommon mixture for the color called Gold Ochre. This was really frustrating for me, both as a paint reviewer and as a consumer. Multiple colors resulted in mini investigations just to be able to swatch and label the pigment so they can be properly compared to other brands. Colors like Quin Gold and Cobalt Violet Deep Hue had so many errors that not only did the pigments on my paint labels differ from Jackson's website, but they also differed from Sennelier's listed pigments. I literally ended up with 3 different sets of information for the same color. This is pretty bad because these particular colors were actually exact matches when swatched side by side, meaning that either Jackson's or Sennelier or both are passing along carelessly written ingredient lists. This results in undisclosed pigments being present in paints, which is basically false advertising and misleading to the artist buying them. When shopping around, the first thing you might notice is that Jackson's paints are more affordable than Sennelier. Despite that lower cost, many of their paints are priced at or above the cost of White Knights, which is a very competitive brand alternative to keep in mind for consideration. I suspect that there are a few reasons for the price difference between Sennelier and Jackson's. Many of my pans were filled to notably different levels, which definitely feels sloppy compared to other brands. While many manufacturers pour their paints to give you a nice evenly filled pan, Sennelier and Jackson's have a dehydrated, extruded, and cut method, which is cut poorly at messy angles. This results in very loose colors that rattle around in the pan, easily fall out, and in some instances I've had undercuts resulting in about 25% less paint than I would have received from another brand. Be aware that Sennelier offers 98 colors and Jackson's currently offers just 43, apparently shrinking down from a previous 48. This selection cuts away over half of Sennelier's options and totally skips just about all of the colors I would have recommended. I believe that each brand does certain colors well, and I definitely promote collecting only the best that each brand has to offer. This puts Jackson's at an immediate disadvantage as it lacks useful pigments available in Sennelier's catalog, such as Nickel Azo Yellow, a superbly unique, smoother version of Quin Red PR209, a Cobalt Teal, Caput Mortem, and Ultramarine Violet. While I often collect single pigment paints, Sennelier also makes notably useful convenience mixtures ideal for botanicals and foliage-filled landscapes. My favorite of those mixtures, like Chinese orange, olive, and forest green, were also not included in the Jackson selection. I overall enjoy White Knights paints more, and they offer colors that Jackson's doesn't, such as an affordable cobalt turquoise PP28, a beautiful granulating ultramarine blue, as well as stronger textural earth pigments like Mars Brown and Burnt Umber. With a broad selection of at least 110 colors, that includes convenience pastels and metallics, they seem to have more options to suit anyone's art style. Every brand has a couple problem colors, and I've seen reviews that Jackson's Cerulean is gummy, which is fairly common for this pigment. I have a more broad experience with White Knights, which seems like they offer a higher pigment load and pan form than Jackson's, with very few gummy or gritty textural problem colors. I'll make brand overview and color recommendation videos for White Knights and Sennelier separately in the future. When looking at anyone's paint comparisons, including my own, know that many colors, especially mixtures, are prone to batch-specific inconsistency. This makes comparing colors extremely difficult, as even Sennelier's Payne's Gray wasn't the same color as the second one I purchased later. Both of my Sennelier Payne's Gray were less blue-leaning than the Jackson's version. After my experience with magenta, I thought perhaps their tube formula might help colors flow better, but this trait ended up being reversed for Payne's Gray. That could be because the blue flows easier than the black, and the most stagnant Payne's Gray was the darkest one of my tubes. Your guess is as good as mine if the extra blue-leaning hue in Jackson's is just a normal batch variance, or if it indicates a difference between how Sennelier is making Jackson's paints. Regardless, I don't think many artists will appreciate the inconsistency. While I expect some rewettability and flow differences between pans and tubes, I expect the color to be consistent across the line since there's only one color chart. As someone who makes purchasing decisions based on reliable, light-fast pigment ingredient codes and not made-up color names, there are packaging and labeling issues that prevent me from fully enjoying or trusting these paints. Jackson's and Sennelier do not offer much in the way of granulating colors, and they have weaker earth browns. I would not buy these brands if your artistic goals include animal art, rocky landscapes, or setting up a versatile palette capable of replicating color separating mixtures like Daniel Smith's Moonglow or Cascade Green, or even Schmincke's super granulating color combinations. Jackson's and Sennelier offer a Viridian as a mixture made up of PG7 and PG18, which can be problematic if you're looking for the individually different mixing properties of those pigments. If you're looking for a nice granulating green for mixing colors similar to Moonglow or Shadow Violet, my personal favorite is M. Graham's Viridian. I've made several videos about replicating popular mixtures using other brands' paints, but I failed to be able to achieve the same mixture effects with Jackson's brand. Some colors are too weak and lack the same texture or flow characteristics you'd find in most other professional watercolor paints. I will reiterate that while I do point out problems with many brands, it's not because I dislike every color they make. As I mentioned, there's actually quite a few Sennelier colors I really enjoy. They just aren't part of Jackson's catalog. They are capable of making great paint, and I especially respect their usefulness in smooth gradients and layering. I'd love to hear your feelings about Jackson, Sennelier, or White Knights. I definitely take notes when fellow artists comment about problem colors or their experiences. I hope that passing along my observations, positive or negative, will be helpful to you. I've pretty much committed to unhindered honesty at this point. I don't mind knowing that I'm less likely to ever get brand sponsorships or company support for my projects. Integrity is important to me, and I care more about us on the consumer end rather than flattering a company or making money from recommendations. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. If you'd like to see more, you can find all of my detailed swatch card images, results from my independent light-fast testing, and other art supply reviews on my website. I'm currently building a huge pigment database where thousands of colors can be compared side by side with paint from other brands. Updates about this project, along with line art drawings and high-res color scans, are also available on Patreon. Thanks for watching.